Welcome back to The Way That I See It. My name is Lisa Superfox and this is my podcast. So today I have the pleasure of interviewing my gorgeous friend Nikki. We have been friends for, oh God, maybe 8 years, maybe 8, yeah, a while.
Since about 2014 maybe.
Okay, yeah, 8 years. Oh my God, it's 2022, as if time goes so fast. But the reason I wanted to bring Nikki on today is not just because she is my friend and someone I really believe that you will relate to, but also because Nikki has been on one hell of an entrepreneurial journey. And I know that I have a lot of people that listen to this podcast who are entrepreneurs, budding business people, and people on personal development and mindset journeys. And one of the things that I have had firsthand opportunity to witness is Nikki's personal growth over the last 8 years, seen her go on a huge transformation in body, mind, and definitely spirit and soul. I'm sure we'll get into a bit of that today. But Nikki, rather than me do you a disservice and give a summary of, your career, your credentials, what you do now, I would love for you to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about, I guess, maybe where you are now, and maybe over the last few years where that business and entrepreneurial side of you came from, and then maybe we can dig into the personal side and get into the topics we want to talk about today.
Okay, cool. Okay, so where I am now is I am a somatic sexologist and sexological body worker. That's my official title. Essentially, I'm a sex coach, but from an embodied perspective rather than what's going on in the head. So it's all about feeling. I also teach pelvic floor health, and I do some energy work, holistic practices with energy work. So Reiki, Theta, gong baths, cacao ceremonies, and a little bit of yoga at retreats. So that's where I am now. Before that, I was a personal trainer for 11 years. So you might think it sounds completely different, but there was like a real thread that kind of came with that. And it was, I got into personal training because of my own traumas. Essentially, my mental health was not good. I got into exercising. I realized the difference it made to mental health. I ended up doing some charity events and fundraising for SAN's stillbirth charity, and then realized that it wasn't just me that exercise helped. I saw the impact it had on my friend who I was doing the biggest event we did for, and her mental health through a really difficult time. So I got into personal training actually when I was at the lowest point in my life. I actually was in the Priory at the time I signed up for doing PT, and yeah, I trained. Before that I had children and I'd been working for other people, and I knew I didn't want to work for myself. I am the shittest employee, honestly, because I see, I don't know, I feel like I could see where things needed to change, and it's so frustrating not being the person that can implement these things without having to ask someone, and there being this whole corporate thing like happening, and that was frustrating for me, especially having grown up with parents that were entrepreneurial and seeing the freedom they had, and then feeling like I was, and also my soul is not something that can be put in a birdcage in any format at all. Work, sex, relationships, anything. So yeah, I did that, and then I was specializing working with women for a long time with personal training. Always came at it with mindset and mental health at the forefront, and aesthetics afterwards, and realized that a lot of the women that were coming to me had pelvic floor dysfunction, and they were of all ages, from late 20s till menopausal. It doesn't discriminate against where you are in your life. So I went and did some training on that, and through then working more intimately with people, coaching them around pelvic floor health, realized the impact that had on their sex life. And at the same time, I was simultaneously going through this journey with my own sexual traumas. I was raped when I was 15, never told anyone, got myself into a situation in 2010, so 15 years later, when I couldn't run from it anymore and had to face it head on. And I can't go into the details of that for legal reasons, but I was at a point where it was like, deal with it, tell people what happened, or it's going to eat you up. So yeah, that was kind of there's two journeys. So entrepreneurial, I was going through this kind of learning to build a business and relating to people on a business level and juggling all of the things that you have to do as an entrepreneur, especially before you can be delegating certain jobs to other people, and seeing how women's stories and lives were running parallel to mine, and how being in service to them filled me up and helped me, and how I helped them. So it's just evolved really, and I got to the point where I just didn't want to do fitness anymore. It wasn't enough. I want people, even though I did the mindset and mental health coaching, people still saw me as a personal trainer, and so the level also they were able to meet me at, because I was attracting people that were at a certain point in their journey and weren't ready to go to the next level yet. There was a misalignment, and I was like, what am I going to do about this? I also needed to sell my house, which was where I had a personal training studio, and I needed to completely turn life on its head, basically. So in 2019, I retrained. I'd already done my ICF life coaching. I had my pelvic floor thing. I was teaching yoga. So I had these other elements of the business that I could rely on. Brought an absolute wreck of a house with land, so that we'll hopefully build 2 properties on the land that we've got. So there's some other threads with business coming into property development there. And yeah, I was like, I'm going to focus on that. Retrained as a somatic sexologist, and at that point really it was like almost like another dive off the cliff into this next layer of my own development. I won't go in, I'll let you lead into that, Lucy.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. But I mean, just everything you said I think is so relatable to me as well. You know, just I think there were 2 things that were converging. Like you said, you had your own personal journey with your own personal healing and personal growth, and whether it's, you know, the surface level of self-worth, and actually whether it's the deeper level of who you are and identity, and working those stories. And I can totally relate to that kind of converging journey at the same time as how your business evolved. And I love what you said about there came a point where you were attracting people that you weren't aligned with because of the proposition of your business.
Yeah,
that's exactly what happened to me with prep coaching. Prep coaching for me was 100% what I was supposed to do for the 3.5 years that I did it. I was 1,000,000% supposed to be that coach to those girls for that time. What I realized was I'd reached a point where that was no longer going to be part of my journey. Like, I love the industry even now, still present Pure Elite, you know, I love it as a sport and a hobby type fun thing, but it got to the point where I knew I needed to go all in or all out. And I think that for me, I recognized the misalignment. I recognized where I wanted to go and where my journey was going, and just like yourself, decided to evolve my businesses in that direction. So can totally relate on an entrepreneurial level. And as much as we've been through many different experiences and things in our lives, there's so much about what you said around your kind of, I guess, your personal journey and, you know, facing things head on. You know, I had a terrible relationship with food. We've talked about food many times over the last 8 years. I had a terrible relationship with food, and, you know, it took me doing all that inner work for me to be able to heal my inner trauma around food and where that came from. So I think we're always all on a journey. And I think one of the things that people who listen to my podcast just love is hearing about the journey, because sometimes, to your point, you know, you were at the Priory at the time you signed up for PT. Somebody right now could be at their version of that, and hearing someone's story talk about where they've been and then where they are and then obviously where they're going is just one of the most inspiring things I think about listening, especially to people like yourself who've been on such an interesting journey as well, not a linear journey by any means. And I think that's one of the most inspiring things, though, because it shows at any point in life we're able to make a pivot, right? We're able to go in a different direction and say, you know what, I said I wanted that, and I give myself permission to fucking change my mind. And that's exactly kind of how I live my life, is I give myself permission to change my mind. And I think one of the things I've been able to witness as your friend, and what you do is you give yourself absolute and total permission to be exactly who you want to be and do exactly what you want to do. And that is I feel like you've really stepped into that, compared to maybe when I first met you 8 years ago. We were both a bit like, is that what I should do? Like, is that what I should do? Is that, like, now we're like, fuck yeah, I'm doing it my way, let's go. And I love it.
And actually, there's 2 things that come up for me when you're saying that. And one of them is certainly like, the last 2 weeks, something I've been grappling with as well. There's another leaning in for me at the moment with work, is that one of my challenges along that was that I did give myself permission to make these changes, but at the same time I was really fighting against the conditioning of, we have to make a decision on what we're doing, and if we change that, we're failing. You know, there's a real argument in there, and I know it's not my voice, you know, that's not my values, my beliefs, nothing. But it's been said to me many times by people, oh, why are you changing again? Oh, you're doing something different, you're always doing something different. I'm like, no, I'm evolving my business to be in alignment with myself and to be in service to where I want my life to be, and also the people that I want to work with as well. So like, I believe if you're in alignment with yourself, then you'll attract those people that you want to be in. And if you're not doing something that's making your heart sing, then that's not going to happen. But it doesn't mean it's easy, or that, yeah, it's not easy to drop that conditioning when you've got people saying those things. But also, I don't want to take advice from people whose values, beliefs, way that they live, you know, their opinions, although being a sensitive and an empath, they hit, they don't penetrate, they all linger and sting for sure. But I'm not interested in changing my choices, my life choices, which are very much not the norm for someone whose opinion I don't value.
So interesting you said that, because I did a live on Monday, at the time of recording this anyway, it was Monday at the time I did this live, about being a multi-passionate, and about how for a while I kind of had this, you know, maybe the older corporate Lucy, the prior A-type, aggressive, forward-thinking, linear Lucy would have, and I actually said it, I was chatting with a friend on Saturday, and I was like, I kind of feel like I've been floating around for 5 years, and I kind of feel like I just need to make a decision. I actually said that on Saturday last week, make a decision about which direction I want to go in. And actually, I don't have to do fucking anything. Like, I earn more money now being a multi-passionate and get basically to do whatever I want, than if I'd decided to one career path. So interesting about what you said about this conditioned need to make a decision, to set on a career path, to stick with something, that there's, for some reason, we give people more validation or worth if they've put time in the bank for something versus actually something that they're passionate about. And that's what blows my brain, is we honor people who've been at companies for 35 years, right? And there's nothing to say there's anything wrong with that, but what if they fucking hate their job and they stayed for the, you know, no judgment if you stayed for the pension pack, right? Like, whatever you want to do. But I think, isn't it interesting how society tells us that we should be, and I've done loads of work on shame at the moment, so a lot of like my social media content's been about shame, and like, you know, how shame affected my life over the last kind of 3 years and how I freed myself from that. But that society says we should make a decision, we should know who we want to be, we should know what we want to do. And I think this is a nice segue actually, Nikki, really into what we were talking about before we jumped online around, I guess there are two parts, so we've got a lot to talk about, so I think maybe we'll go direction today, talking about emotional exploration. That's the topic I'm going to call it, emotional exploration. So obviously I'm a personal development and mindset coach, so what I would argue on that is that I will 100% take people on a journey from a mindset perspective, so the way that they think about the world, the way they see their world, their beliefs, their values, things we talked about, right? But I recognized in 2020, so yeah, 2 years ago, in lockdown, that I'd done a lot of work on all of this. I call, like, I'm signaling for people on the podcast, not on YouTube, like the head, right? I'd done all the head work. I was like, I've got the right goggles on, I know what I want to see, I believe in myself, I believe I can be a millionaire, I can, all the things that I want, all the logic was done. But I felt like my body was physically stuck. I felt physically stuck. Even though mentally I was like, yeah, but I believe I can have it, so why? And what happened for me is I recognized that there was a body element, and by that I mean obviously a soul and a body, right? So there's mind, body and soul. They're the kind of three, I guess we could call them. I'm sure you're probably going to tell me there's like 8. But for the purpose of me explaining this, we'll say there's 3. I think as a coach, I do the head work, right? That's what I do, is I do the head work, the logical thinking, the courses, the progress. That's what I do, right? And what I recognized in my own personal journey in 2020 was there is so much more than that. And I believe there's a role for different people or different coaches or mentors, whatever it is, at different times in your life. But also there's different work that we need to do. And I don't believe there's just one or the other. I believe that we're holistic, we're whole people, right? We need to be able to do it all. So for me, the way I describe emotional exploration is maybe less of the mindset work and the head work, and more of the deeper stuff, more of the deeper stories, the energy. Masculine and feminine has been something that I've had to really navigate as a businesswoman who also, you know, identifies as a female, who's very, so I've gone on a really interesting journey with emotional exploration. And I guess what I wanted to ask you as somebody, you know, you say you do Reiki, you do all sorts of other things, is to maybe walk us through what that level of, beyond the head work, beyond the you know, the logic, shall we say, I guess, what is emotional exploration? Like, what is that next level of doing the work? I know that's a big question, so please feel free to take it in any direction that you want.
Okay. I'm just going to feel into that for a second and see where it's going to take us. And I suppose that is the first thing, is that I could think that question and answer it cognitively, or like now I'm dropping into my body, I'm like, okay, how's that landing? And really I think what you're describing is the felt sense in the body is what we hold in our body. We know that trauma is held in our body. Every experience we have in our life isn't just happening to our mind. It literally is physically held in the tissues of our body. And we can do all of the mindset work, but essentially the ego is existing here. So there's this battle of what's going on in the mind. And it was interesting, you were saying like you had this like feeling, and the feeling is the wisdom that is in your body telling you that regardless of all of the work that you've done and all of the amazing things you're doing, there's something out of alignment, there's something that needs to shift in the body. And it may be that we want all of these things. We want the multi-million pound business and the life of freedom, and maybe your body's calling to have a backpack and be on a beach in Bali. You know, and there is something in this, you know, especially if you're entrepreneurial minded. There's a conflict sometimes, I think, with mind, body, soul, and it's for us to reconcile what that needs to look like. And certainly something that is very alive for me right now is that choices I made 20 years ago, when I was a very different person, not living in an embodied way. So I was very much in the trauma that was in my head and in the things that had happened to me and in that story, and not listening. I was disassociating. I was using alcohol and smoking and partying and using sex in a negative way that actually meant that I wasn't listening to my body at all. It's been a long journey to get to that point. So I think the emotional intelligence, emotional wisdom is actually in not being in all of the work that we've done, and all of that stuff is really, really important and really relevant. But the next level is going, okay, I know this now, and I'm going to park it and know that I've got it there, and I'm just going to trust that coming into my body and finding a way to do that where I'm really held and I feel safe is going to allow me another layer of wisdom, like some more knowledge about myself, and go into it with curiosity. But I think there's very much this safety element. So certainly with the work that I do, it's all based around the nervous system and supporting our vagal function. And when things happen to us in life, we have these responses, which sometimes takes us to being this strong, fierce, corporate kind of hard, like, I'm not going to let anything penetrate me, and this is how I cope and how I exist in the world. And to come into our felt sense and the wisdom that's in our body requires us to be really courageous, because it means that sometimes we have to deal with the stuff that's actually harder than processing any of the thoughts that happen. You know, the feeling of the things that are held in our body and the releasing of that is incredibly freeing, but it needs us to be courageous in that exploration.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love that. And you said two things that I really, as phrases that I really like. You said one, what's alive for me right now. I love that. Like, so I just love that as a phrase. It's great. And what you said about being embodied, I think that's exactly what I was talking about. Like, I was talking the other night on a training for the network marketing company I'm part of, and I was saying that I believe it's a full body business. And what I mean is that anyone who's an entrepreneur needs to be fully embodied. Perhaps I should have added the embodied, right? Embodied in their business, because I don't believe any successful entrepreneur is just in there in thought and, you know, mental. Like, anyone who's really building something massive, and that's something that's creating momentum, and that something's really growing, and massive for you might look massive, different massive for me, right? On the progression of the success curve, shall we say, in, you know, language. So like the success curve of your business and what you want your business to look like. I don't believe that you can do that with just your head and just knowledge and just logic and just thoughts, because if you could, honestly, everyone would be a millionaire. Like, I believe, especially with network marketing, especially because it's a relationship business, especially because it's a people-led thing, it's an embodied business. And I remember someone saying to me when I'd clearly gone on a massive shift in my personal growth, they said, it's like you're in your body now. And that is exactly how I would describe just before I would promote through levels, or I have a big shift in my coaching business, or whatever else I'm doing at the time. This is multi-passionate floating around the world over here, is I'm just become more embodied. I just become fully myself. And I think what happens is we go through life, and like you said, things happen. And I always feel like I fragment sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like almost a bit breaks off, and then a bit breaks off. And then I get the head in line. And then if I don't then get the body in line, nothing really moves. Like, I think this is the bit, once you've done a lot of personal growth and maybe some, you know, therapy work as well, depending on what's happened, you know, this bit is, you can get this in line in a relatively linear fashion. I don't mean, you know, 3 weeks of therapy and you're done, right? But in a relatively logical and linear fashion, right? Because it's a brain, it's a machine, it's a robot. But I think when it comes to then attaching that to that full embodied experience, that full inner wisdom, inner knowing, the deeper part of you, I feel like that's the bit that is not, it's a constant work, right? It's like, it's an ongoing work. So like, how do you know, I've used a million words here, energy, alignment, you know, however you want to describe it. How do you stay in that place of, I guess, emotional alignment, for want of a better phrase?
I feel like sometimes, you know, I'm also human. I'm having a human experience on this planet. Sometimes I jump out of that, or I might like take a foot out of it and it feels hideous. Like, I'll be doing, things won't be flowing. I'll perhaps have a stagnation point where clients aren't coming to me. Like, I was really gripping on to holding my regular yoga classes recently, and they've been really struggling to take off again since the pandemic. And I was full twice a week, 25 clients regularly, you know, and it was easy flow, but that's not been happening, and I was holding on to it. And I was also really frustrated because I wasn't bringing on the clients that I want with my sex coaching business. And I had to make the choice to let it go. And literally that day, I had 3 inquiries, and not just for any sex coaching, but for the specific client that I want to attract. And I was like, even my husband was like, see, you know this, you know, when you let it go, it comes. But I was holding on. So sometimes I think those fragmented parts are, that I think there's a point in business where you have to take the leap. It feels scary. And that's when people say that entrepreneurs are crazy, right? Because it would be easy to, in some ways, have the 9 to 5. And I was thinking when we were talking earlier, I think it was when we were recording and not before, but it's okay for people, you know, if people are in that kind of corporate, or, you know, they're employed. And I was thinking, I had this image of like a man that's collecting his pension, and what it rolled back to was how that's affected his family. So say you've got a guy that has kept this steady job, they feel like they need to be the earner, you know, they're thinking about like primarily the caveman that goes out and brings back the catch. And there's a real pressure for men to be providing for families and in relationships. But the knock-on effect of that is potentially he's completely out of alignment. So he's not been able to attract the abundant life that he wants, but also that then impacts everything else, like a domino effect. He's probably, relationship is not where he wants to be. Perhaps, you know, he hasn't got the friends around him. Perhaps he does not living in a life that is lighting him up, right? So that when we fragment these parts, it can be because we're scared to take the risk, or because we feel these other pressures that we need to do. But if we can just be in one, doing practices that make us really embodied, and being courageous to dive into that, and also be in that tipping point where it feels like, shit, this is really scary, we will start to know then we're in alignment, because things come. And when you're out of that, when you're in that fragmented place and parts aren't quite lined up, nothing will flow. You'll feel like shit. You'll probably be, I don't know, feeling those dark night of the soul vibes. You know, there's something will just feel off. You'll feel unsettled. There will be, if you take quiet and take some time of reflection and not be busying yourself. So we can be so busy. I need to do this, I need to do that, I've got this to do, that to do, I'm going to fill up my weekend, I'm going to drink on the weekend. If you're opening a bottle of wine at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm thinking that, like, if that's a regular occurrence, I can see you laughing, Luce. But if you're relying on those things, something's out.
Okay, right, let's talk about it. So I was relying on these things. So I was relying on these things. I was totally fragmented. My body, I'm not doing any embodied work. I wasn't even working out. So that tells you, because I was blocking myself. So here was great, right? Head to neck, anyone that's on the podcast, head to neck was fantastic. But fully, I knew something was off, and I wasn't prepared to address it or deal with it. And I still haven't quite got to the bottom of what it is. I think there was I've been on a big shame journey. And I think because I felt shame about certain things, I think I logically rationalized the reasons I felt shame, which is why my head sorted itself out. But the feeling of shame, like anyone that's ever been made to, you know, feel embarrassed or ashamed, and ashamed and shame is not actually the same thing, but to be made to feel shamed in an environment. So let's say somebody in front of a big room shamed your outfit and said, oh my God, what are you wearing that for? That we all know what that feeling is like in our body. And I think I was carrying that feeling of shame, even though here was like, yeah, tickety boo, totally makes sense, that's what I'm going to do. I hadn't actually fully acknowledged and addressed it. And, you know, to your point, I needed to be embodied. You know, I started working out again and was crying every time I was going to the gym, because it's holding on to so much negative energy. I wanted to talk to you about two things that you said that came out of what you said around why entrepreneurs are crazy, that kind of feeling of being on the edge, that, you know, and I can relate to that. I walked away from my corporate job with absolutely fuck all guarantees, and I was in flow. And so this is how I matched my corporate salary in less than 6 months, right? And
exactly,
I was in flow, not because I was particularly good. I was new. I hadn't got a clue what I was doing. Like, I was in flow. But two things you said, which I know we can both relate to, is where does that feeling like you're talking about, almost being on the tipping point and edge, and where does that align if someone's, and I don't necessarily mean physical safety, I mean if someone's value is almost, well, I have a thing, which is I don't necessarily believe what people say their values are actually their values. I think they're perceived values. But let's assume that someone understands values and they believe they value safety and security, but they want to run their own business, but they want to be successful and scale and take that. Like, how does one reconcile that?
I mean, it's fucking hard, right? There's no way around it. It's really hard. The like, I'm literally like, the feeling that comes into my heart is that where I always come to reconcile is, if I knew I was going to die next week, would I be making these choices? And at the end of my life, how do I want to have lived? Do I want to be laying there with regrets? Or, you know, do I want to live every day that I feel, nearly every day? Obviously not every day is amazing. We can't sugarcoat that and make this like this whole like sparkly journey that if you're doing all of the things that are in alignment, that everything's going to be, you know, singing, talking animals like in Cinderella all of the time. It doesn't work like that. But there's a feeling of peace within you when you know you're on the right path and you're doing the right things. And ultimately, we know we both did agree, believe in the law of attraction, and so I don't know the people that are listening to this, maybe they're there, maybe they're not, but essentially, if you've got that feeling of peace, that's all that matters.
Totally. And interestingly enough, about what you said, this is where I believe the head work and the body work, we'll call it for the purpose of this, comes into alignment, because that feeling of peace comes from both.
Yeah.
It comes from the knowledge and knowing you're enough, you're worthy, you believe you can do it, the story says you can, the narrative in your mind has changed, plus not hiding and running from, like I was, clearly, I was running from a feeling of shame. Being able to align the two things, that's what will give you the sense of peace. And it's when, in my experience, in my journey, is when one's been off. So either my body's felt great and I've been aligned, but my head's saying, yeah, but how, or vice versa. My head's like, I know the how, I know what I'm doing, let's freaking go. And my body's like, oh, you sure?
And when you come back into the body, the how doesn't matter. You know, there's so much wisdom there.
Yeah. Which is exactly why I wanted to start this kind of, I mean, no, this might even be 3 podcasts, babe. We'll see if we can, about emotional exploration, because I think, like you say, I'm fully in the personal development mindset space. I believe that's the first step for everybody. Like, I'm a first step person. I always have been. I'm like, let's take the first 5 steps together, and then I'll hand you off, whether that was in my personal training business or this, let me hand you off to the next level of your life. Like, that's kind of my concept, right? And so for me, I know that every single time I level up, every single time I evolve, I go do the head work, and then I need to do the body work. And some people do it in different order, right? Sometimes they do the body work, they feel aligned, but they're like, I'm not sure I believe I can have it. And then they have to do some of the inner work. But something I wanted to bring up, and because I'm moving out of the house that I'm in 3 weeks, and I have felt, and actually Josh will relate, my partner will relate, in his sense of his car, he's not had a great run with his car. Like, bought a great car and it's just not ended up great for, as you can, things happen, right? And this house, we moved into it a year ago in a rush sense. The landlords we had before basically told us they were selling, so we found somewhere else, then turned out they didn't sell. It was literally like the biggest waste of time. That's actually happened to us twice, so that's clearly a story. There's clearly something in that which I haven't quite dug into. But since we lived in this house, right, redecorated the whole thing, tried to make it my own, I've just never been happy in this environment. Now, there's nothing outwardly wrong with my house. It's a very nice house, it's very spacious, in a great location, like the logic of it. But what I want to ask you is about the energy of your environment and how that can impact, or stunt, perhaps is a better word, your emotional and maybe mental as well, mindset, but how that can have an impact on your growth. Because I know how it impacts your mindset. I can tell you that if you're around negative people and your environment's not inspiring, and what I call the surface level elements, right? The things that get the head going. But from an energetic, emotional point of view, what's your take on environments and energy?
Okay. This feels like a really massive question. And I feel like I want to ask you a question.
Okay, ask me a question, then we can refine it.
When you made the decision to move to that house, was there a part of you that knew it wasn't right?
Do you know what? Looking back, and again, rose into spectacles, memories blurred, and I've also worked out that I'm a very quick detacher of memories. So when I'm not aligned, my body and head are not connected, I don't remember anything. Like, my memory for numbers and postcodes is ridiculous. Like, I could probably tell you your postcode, babes, but I can't necessarily remember, because I detach myself emotionally, right, from things. And I've obviously done it as a protection mechanism, still working on it, right?
Yeah.
But I think I felt my values of freedom and choice. I think I felt forced to make a fast decision that I didn't feel ready to make. Because this is what I've been wrestling with, right? I'm like, I believe that it's the story we tell about something, and the energy that something has is the energy that we give it. That's what I personally believe. But then sometimes, you know, when outwardly things are happening, even though you don't think you believe that, how do you reconcile the energy of environments? Like, is that a thing, or is it the energy that we give it? Maybe that's a more refined question.
I think people know when something isn't right, and you can choose to be in trust that it will unfold, or you can rush the decision and make something happen because you feel you need to do something. So you're being in the doing rather than in the being, which is where feeling happens. And when you're in the doing, it kicks you out of alignment. And the thing with going out of alignment is that then it costs you energy to bring it back. Like there's work that has to be done to, one, in noticing first that you're out of alignment. Everyone's different with how quickly that's going to happen. Some people it might take ages. For someone that's done loads of work, it might be quickly. But if we stay in the being, then, and we add the element of trust, you'll always end up in the right place. Things will unfold. If we're trusting in the divine timing and in the law of attraction, then what's the rush to make the choice? But when we've got this coaching head on and we're up here, for anyone listening, I'm like spinning my hand round my head. That's the disconnect. For me, it's always going to be body first, because the body isn't holding the cognitive memories, it's not holding the stories and the attachments to things. It's holding the like, we hold trauma in there, but it hasn't got the ego and all of the other storytelling that goes on that's attached with that. And I really think, I mean, I know I can't go into why I know in such detail, but I know what it's like to live in a place where energetically it's uncomfortable, and sometimes there's lessons in being in that place. Sometimes we have to be there, like fate, destiny, whatever it is, you're there, and we can choose to be in the lessons that we're learning from that. So, you know, that's when we need to check in. Is this, like, what is this teaching me? What is this showing me? What do I need to learn here? What's the constant lesson? Where's the thread from things, the patterns that have been happening before? And then when we've done those lessons and we've learned them, we'll make a different choice. But until we've learned them, the universe will keep showing us those lessons.
100% agree. And everything you said is so interesting, is very much what some of my new mini bundles have been about. Like the final module in each one has been literally about this, about adding in that layer of trust, the feeling, not the doing. But I think what I loved about what you just said mostly is about making decisions without the ego and the stories. And I think that is where 99.9% of the time when we come to make big decisions, we will always lead with our head, because who wants to be told that was a crazy decision or that wasn't logical? And, you know, how do you explain that feeling unless you know you're surrounded by a group of people who are all feeling led people? You look around, people are like, oh, have you done that? And you're like, I don't know.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm so pleased that I'm around feeling led people. The best choice I ever made was trusting my gut, even though it was scary, and stepping into where my tribe really is, because all of those people are feeling their people. So no one ever says you're crazy or you're this and you're that. And sometimes we do need to have a foot in each of those like waters, and it feels like doing the splits. But ultimately, when you make the right choices from being than doing, things will flow, and they'll soon be saying, how did you do that, and not why did you do it.
100%. And I think this is where, you know, I always call on people, and I think just due to time we'll probably wrap this here, and then we've got so much to talk about. But I think I'll bring that to a nine, which is why doing the work. When we talk about doing the work, we don't mean hard work, we don't mean academic work, we mean doing the inner work. So whether you've got to work on the stories, the beliefs, like I'd call it the lenses in your glasses, right, the way you see the world, that's going to limit your capacity to grow and change and develop. But equally then it's being open and willing to doing that inner body, soul, spirit work, to be able to, like you said, let go of the ego in those times that matter, when the decision has to be made or the thing has to be done, or you're at a crossroads in life, to then be able to lean in and trust that. And I think it's always going to be both. It's never going to be either or. It's the yin and the yang. I'm sure we'll talk about the yin and the yang and all the energy stuff we do next time. But I think you said so much stuff today, Nikki, that people will resonate with, whether it's come up before for them in books or audios, or, you know, something that they are on maybe a journey with themselves. And I know that people would maybe love to connect with you. So I would love for you to share kind of like your web. We can put it all in the description as well, of course, but your website, your Instagram, it's everything Celestial Soul Coach, right?
Yeah. So all of my social media handles are at Celestial Soul Coach. And my website is celestialsoul.co.uk.
Perfect. And
the main place I hang out is on Instagram. I'm not a huge Facebook fan, but I do have a page on there, but all it is transferred from Instagram. So if you want to interact, find me on Instagram.
Love that. And then next time We're going to talk about sexual exploration, what
Yeah.
that is. We're going to maybe make it a long one. Maybe we'll do like we can tell people when it's doing, we can maybe do it live, maybe we'll see. And we get a little bit as well. I know I want to definitely explore conversations around gender identity. I want to explore some conversations about females stepping into all the definitions of what the word sexuality means, which I've learned today in our previous conversations. There are many layers of that definition. So if this is something that you want to get into, you want to know more about, make sure to follow Nikki, make sure to subscribe to this podcast, and we will be back with you soon on part 2 of this forever insightful conversation. Nikki, thank you so much for joining me today. Honestly, I'm so gracious and grateful for your time. I know people will have taken so much value and content from that. So thank you for joining me.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me, darling.
Love it. And that was The Way That We See It.